Welcome, everybody, to the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. My name is Ben Smith, and I'm one of the co hosts here on the show. Listeners, I hope you're all doing well today. If you want to be a part of the podcast, you can email us at bensmith@guidancepointrs.com, or you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Just search Retirement Success in Maine podcast. You can find some additional content. At this time, let me welcome the pumpkin spice latte to my iced apple crisp chai, Curtis Wister. How you doing today, Curtis?
Right, I'm doing well, Ben. I'm doing well. That's one of my favorites there with the pumpkin spice. So that's great. How are you?
Well, yeah, me too. It's you're in the Northeast. It's getting chillier. It's like 50
That's right.
degrees out. You got to warm up. So,
That's right.
got to celebrate fall and get warm at the same time. Well, obviously, we're a show about retirement success, right?
Yeah.
And things that we've been talking about lately. And one of the things that obviously talking with one of our listeners, they had actually shared with us something that struck us that after they had retired from a long, successful career, they'd found themselves kind of feeling unfulfilled.
Yeah.
This listener said, I spent years looking forward to retirement, but now that I'm here, I don't know what to do with myself. I feel like I've lost my purpose.
Mm.
And of course, we've had that conversation with our clients as financial advisors, and of course, we realize that many retirees, while they've planned carefully for their finances, even their social lives may sometimes overlook the importance of continued personal growth.
Yeah.
So, how do you find new challenges to take on when your career's behind you? How do you keep learning, growing, and staying curious when the structure of a job no longer defines your days? So, our goal today is to explore how embracing lifelong learning and new challenges can give you a renewed sense of purpose in retirement. Whether you're already in retirement or approaching it, we're hoping this episode will provide you inspiration and practical steps to help you continue growing and thriving in the next phase of life.
Mm.
So if you're ready to make your retirement years as fulfilling as possible, stay with us for some valuable insights.
That's right, Ben. That's right. And like we always try to do, we try to bring in a guest who really is an expert and well versed in what we want to talk about today, and that's exactly what we've done. So our guest today has worked as a television sportscaster, newspaper and magazine writer, teacher, author, and amateur sports official. Her first TV job came at WRBL TV in Columbus, Georgia, and led to positions at WROC TV in Rochester, New York, KTSP TV in Phoenix, Arizona, and then ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut, where she anchored the Emmy Award-winning Sports Center. One of my favorites, I will say. She finished her on-camera broadcasting career with a 2-year stint as the studio host for the NBA's Phoenix Suns. So our guest today was a freelance and/or staff reporter for 6 publications, writing sports, features, movie reviews, and archaeological pieces. Her novels include Your Forgotten Sons, The Castle, A Light in the Desert, Wild Horses on the Salt, The Scent of Rain, and Wolfcatcher. Our guest today also taught high school journalism and communication skills for 20 years and was an amateur sports official for 4 decades, a time during which she called baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball games and served as a high school football referee and crew chief. She's also a foster mom to 3 sons and a daughter. When she can, she indulges in her passions, rock collecting, scuba diving, theater, and playing her guitar. So with that, after hearing that well-diverse background, please join me in welcoming Annie Montgomery to the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. Annie, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Annie, of course, you have such a diverse bio, and it's a lot of fun of just kind of even hearing all the things that you've done here. We want to, of course, get to know you a little bit and have our listeners get to know you a little bit here. So I know Curtis read off a little bit of you had a variety of media roles from anchoring at ESPN Sports Center to hosting for the Phoenix Suns. Got to ask, what was it like to break into the world of sports broadcasting, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry?
And especially in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because clearly it wasn't like it is now. I mean, today you see women sportscasters everywhere. However, I will point out they don't get real important jobs like color and play-by-play. They're the sideline reporters, which is probably the worst sportscasting job that exists. Would you want to put a mic in the face of a coach who's down by 30 points at halftime? I would
No.
not. But yeah,
No.
be that as it may, when I decided I wanted to be a sportscaster, it was 1972. And looking back, I was out of my mind because there simply weren't any women doing that sort of thing. But like a lot of people who get into sports journalism, I was an athlete. Believe it or not, I was an ice dancer.
Oh,
Wow.
Now,
wow.
today,
Wow.
I would be a hockey player.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
back then it was before Title IX. They didn't let me play hockey. They didn't let girls do those things. So I knew very little about any sport besides ice hockey because I grew up in an arena. So I decided I wanted to be a sportscaster because I was on something called the broadcast crew at my high school. And that was where every morning we had a radio show. And it was a half hour, and it was when everybody's in homeroom, and we did announcements. And one day, one of the hockey players, because I did stats for the hockey team, he said, "Hey, Annie, would you go and do this announcement for us?" I went, "Sure." And I went into the broadcast room, and I decided to pull all the sports stories, just because, we usually tried to keep stories grouped together. You should have heard the guys scream. "You can't read the sports. You're a girl."
Oh my
And
goodness.
I went, "Well, why can't I?" I mean, it didn't ever occur to me. It was strange. And the teacher who was the head of the broadcast crew came in and he said, "You got 5 minutes to get on the air. If Annie wants to read the sports, she can read the sports." And so they had to let me do it.
Very
And the
cool.
next day I did it again, and they got very angry. And so they got me some theme music. And before I would go on, they would play Mission Impossible. Remember? Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then they started calling me Big Ann with the sports. And they thought I would be offended, but I really liked it. And after a while, coaches and players were all handing me notes in the hall. "Would you read this tomorrow morning?" So when my mother approached me before my senior year and said, "Okay, it's time for you to pick a college. What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a sportscaster." And my mother looked at me through her cat eye glasses and said, "I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you. Don't be ridiculous."
Jeez.
And that was pretty much even all through college.
Yeah.
My professor said, "You will never, ever be a sportscaster. You are a woman." Yet my
Wow.
senior year, they allowed me to co-host a TV show, a PBS TV show. I went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and they said, "You can co-host." I said, "Great." And so I went to the football coach and the basketball coach and the baseball coach, and they wouldn't speak to me. They would not allow me to interview them. And so I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? And finally, they said, "Okay, your partner's going to interview all of them." And I realized on a college campus, there's a wrestling team, a gymnastics team, an archery team, a swim team that no one ever pays attention to. So I started seeking all those teams out, and they were so delighted to have someone interview them that they were happy to talk to me.
Yeah.
So even though the big guys wouldn't deal with me, fine. Okay. I got out of college, and it's 1977, and I couldn't get an interview anywhere. And I went to Washington, D.C., worked in a bar in Georgetown, which in those days, 80s, Georgetown, great fun. Not sure
Yeah.
I wanted a real job.
Mm.
My parents were horrified. "We sent you to college to be a waitress," right? Was basically. But then one night I went to see the Washington Capitals play with my aunt. A friend was with her, and he was bemoaning the fact that there were not enough ice hockey officials for kids because he was an ice hockey official, like for little kids.
Yeah.
And my aunt went, "Well, Annie can skate." That was true. I was an ice dancer. Okay. I was not very good, but I grew up on ice skates, figure skates. So I said, sure. And I took the test and I went to the classes, and they scheduled me for my first game. And that was 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'd done a shift at the restaurant till like 3 a.m. I put on my stripes, got my whistle, and I put on those hockey skates. Did either one of you ever put on hockey skates?
Yeah.
I mean, yep.
Yep.
Do you know the
Yep.
difference between hockey skates and figure skates?
I mean, appearance wise, yes. And like the toe cleat on the
Yeah,
blade.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are called
Nice.
toe picks. Toe
Okay.
picks.
Toe
But
pick. All right.
You get a beer.
All
Toe
right.
pick. So I grew up on toe picks, and it's lazy skaters like me. You fall down, you did your toe in, you get up. They're for jumping, and they're not for anything. Hockey skates don't have them. I never noticed that. I put those hockey skates on, went out. I've got like 5-year-old hockey players, the ones with their jerseys to their ankles, and little sawed-off sticks, and their helmets are crooked because they're too. And I go out and I'm taking my first face off, and I fell.
Oh no.
I just instinctively dug my point of my blade into the ice and I fell down again because why? I had no toe picks. And I'm looking up at 5-year-olds and they're just staring at me like, what's wrong with the ref? So I don't remember any more about that game, but I do remember driving home. And I remember thinking I didn't know enough about any sport that other than hockey to report on it. I didn't have the skills to be a sportscaster. And so I decided on that ride home that I would become a certified official in the 5 main team spectator sports at the amateur level: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball. And I would do that for 5 years. And that somewhere, I believed in the country, there would be a forward-thinking news director who would say, oh, yeah, let's hire her. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow. That's incredible. And you just led right into my next question for you, Annie. I know, and you just kind of shared that origin story of becoming an official. Again, we're talking the 5 major sports: baseball, ice hockey, soccer, basketball, football. What are some of the most memorable moments that you can remember? I know you just shared one with us about that first hockey game, but yeah, what are some other memorable moments from that 4-decade career on the field?
Yeah, it is ironic that after the 5 years when I got my job in TV, I never quit officiating. And if you had told me I wouldn't quit officiating until 2019, I would have said you're crazy. Because being an official is not easy. I'm guessing you guys have been to games. You see how we're treated. It's pretty brutal. I mean, I've had my tire knifed. I've had more than one police escort to my car. And today, of course, they put you on the internet if you make a bad call and tell them your name. So it's a difficult avocation, but I fell in love with it. And as far as stories, one of my favorites, I was invited to umpire not a charity game, like a preseason game, not preseason. It was between the Phoenix Firebirds and the San Francisco Giants. The Firebirds were their AAA farm team.
Okay.
And this was a charity event, and it was going to be televised. And are either of you baseball fans?
Oh, yeah. Both of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a problem in baseball. It's called the strike zone. Okay. If you read what the strike zone is, it's like your armpits to your knees, right? But no one calls that. They call these little postage size tiny things. So when I first became an official, I'm kind of anal in a way. I follow rules the way they're written, right? For the most part. So when I was first an umpire, I started calling strike zones, like they were written, and people went crazy on it. And I said, especially when you're doing amateur, why do I want kids to walk? I don't. But anyway, so here I am. They said, we'd like you to come and do the game. And I'm all excited. And I get the plate. So I'm the plate. And here comes Dusty Baker with his lineup party. Barry Bonds is there. And
my goodness.
It's a charity event, right? But it's a real game. And so Dusty comes up to me. We exchange cards with the other manager, and the other manager walks off, and Dusty leans in and he goes, did I mention we have a plane to catch? I went, oh. And I knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted a quick game. So I said, great. And the first kid came up and I struck him out looking at a high pitch. And I went, I'm going to call the real strike zone in this game.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I took so much crap.
I bet you did.
I did, but here's the thing. The game was over in about an hour and 50 minutes. And it's a beautiful sunset in Arizona, and here comes Dusty. He's standing out by the third base line, and he looked at me and he nodded and he walked back into the dugout. And for some reason, that's a game I will never forget.
That's incredible.
I realize I probably should have acted like I was a major league umpire and had a postage stamp sized strike zone, but he had a plane to catch.
Yeah, exactly.
I can just imagine Dusty Baker with his toothpick rolling in his mouth.
He was great. He's a big man. But he was kind to me. And I have to say, people were often not kind to me as an official. And when I first started officiating, I thought it's because I'm a woman, and that was part of it. But it also was because I wore the uniform.
Yeah.
I had the stripes, I had the chest protector, I had my mask and everything. And they just, 50% of the people hate you 50% of the time.
Yep.
They don't care if your call's right. They just care if it goes for their team.
Sure.
So I took a lot of crap. And then there were certainly men right up to the end of my career that wouldn't work with me. And that was no fun. In fact, every year I would get thrown off crews because they'd say, we're never going to get the 5A state championship with you on our crew because you're a woman. And they were right. They were right. So one year in this group of 350 officials in our opening meeting, they said, anybody who wants to start a new crew, be a referee, stand up, and we'll have anybody who's interested in working with you come over. And I stood up in that meeting. Now, here's a test. How many referees on a football field?
6, 5.
I'll give you a hint. It's the same at Pop Warner and the NFL.
Referees, 1. Is this a technical question?
Thank you. Yeah, the rest are officials. The rest are like the umpire, the back judge, the side judge, the headlinesman.
Yeah.
So the referee is the crew chief. The referee is the one in the white hat.
Yeah.
That says I have holding number 76 offense, right? So I decided to be the referee. And I knew when I stood up in that meeting that only men who could deal with me and understanding we'd never get the state championship were going to work with me. And I ended up having guys on my crew sometimes 12, 13 years. And we were a family. Wow. And I really, because I grew up before Title IX, I never played on a team. And so this was the closest I ever got to playing on a team. And I love that idea. And you know what? Today, I'm retired from teaching. I'm retired from broadcasting and reporting. And I don't miss those. But boy, I miss Friday night football.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, I'm just kind of obviously getting the flavor of you here, and just kind of this. Obviously, you're a person that just doesn't take no, right? It's
I don't.
You know what you want to do, and you're going to do it. By gosh darn it! But I have a question because, of course, one of the things that we read in your bio was you've published several novels across different genres, right? So you've done, as you said, teaching, right? So you were a teacher for 20 years. You were a sports official, broadcasting, and then this piece on writing, which, by the way, I know there's kind of journalism is writing, and there's a corollary there. But can you share kind of what inspired this writing journey, again, especially around creating novels, and how you decided to transition from journalism and broadcasting and teaching to becoming a published author?
That's kind of a long story. First of all, I taught sports broadcasting. Sports reporting, and my students were always shocked to know that the most important thing you have to be able to do is to tell a story. They think that sports reporters get up there and ad lib. We do not. It's all written. So on any given night, as a TV sportscaster, I had to write dozens of stories. One might be 15 seconds long, one might be a minute and a half, but I was having to write stories, and we all do that. Even at ESPN, you get to there before SportsCenter begins, and there are 30 stories, and one anchor gets 15, and the other one gets 15, and you've got to write all that stuff. So I learned to write as a sports reporter, which is really funny because I'm dyslexic, something I didn't realize till I was in my 50s. And when I was a kid, I never read. I hated, I was not a good student because back then they just said I was stupid and lazy. Nobody had names for these things. Sure. And so when I started writing for television, it was not something I ever expected to have to do. Why I didn't think of that, I don't know. But yeah, you have to be a writer. So after I worked for 5 TV stations, I was suddenly pushing 40, and I was no longer considered pretty enough to be in front of a camera. And that is the way it is. And I remember saying that to a couple of my college students, and they were like, oh, that's not right, 2 little girls. I said, that's the way it is. It's a visual medium. And sports is targeted at 18 to 34-year-old males. And once you're 35 as a woman, you're not hot enough anymore. Now, I'm going to tell you that I took that well, but I did not. That would be a lie. Okay. I was crushed. And I left ESPN. I did a stint with it, 2 years with the Phoenix Suns. But that was part-time. It was only during the NBA season. And then I found myself without a job. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I even went to a brand new sports bar opened up, and I went, I went to the manager and I said, I can keep your patrons entertained even when they're sobers, and I can make a hell of a cocktail. And I'll never forget this. He looked me up and down and he went, I don't think so. And I realized this light bulb went off. I went, he wants a 20-something in a short skirt and a push-up bra. And I didn't have any way to make a living. I was in the middle of a divorce. I was in debt. And the only thing anybody would pay me to do was officiating. So I pulled out my football gear, I pulled out my baseball gear, and I'd gone from ESPN, anchoring nationally, to calling Pop Warner football and Little League baseball and high school games. And I didn't want to see anybody I knew. I
Wow.
did a great deal of feeling sorry for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasted a couple years doing that. That's one of my very few regrets that I didn't get back on the horse much more quickly. But I ended up going back to college, got a degree, got a teaching degree,
Mm.
and ended up teaching in a Title I school. Now, this is actually relevant to my writing
Mm-hmm.
because I don't write about sports at all. None of my books have anything to do with sports. I taught in a Title I school. I always thought it was going to be just this year. I'll be back in TV next year, right? I taught there for 20 years. And a Title I school is where at least 75% of the kids live in poverty.
Gotcha.
And I grew up in a middle class family. Both my parents went to college. You know, of course I was going to college. I had never been around a community where there was, you know, there was addiction and gangs and teen pregnancy and foster care. I mean, hundreds of kids in foster care, and neglect was big, and
Mm.
homelessness. It was just terrible. And for me, I went in there like a raging bull, sort of. You know, I'm going to whip these kids into shape because I did not understand that. And so I go in there and I'm teaching communications. I'm teaching a TV show and newspaper, that kind of thing. And one day my students they didn't do their work. They were all late, and I'm always screaming, "You got to be punctual." I was on TV. I'm like, if I was 1 second late on TV, then the red camera light goes off, and I'm not there, and I lose my job. And as a referee, I can't be late.
Sure.
I'm holding up all
Sure.
those people. So I'm screaming. I was really mad at the kids. And one of my kids stood up in the middle class and she said, "We don't like you. We don't need you." And they all left.
Oh my goodness.
Every kid in my class walked out. And, you know, I consider myself a tough girl. I mean, I'm not going to tell you I don't cry sometimes, but I never do it publicly. And
Mhm.
I stood in front of that empty classroom and I cried. I didn't know what to do. I thought, I'm
Mhm.
getting them ready for the future. Why do they hate me? And another teacher came in. She said, "Come with me." And she sat me down and she said, "Have you ever considered being nicer?" I said, "Nicer?" I said, "There's no nice in a newsroom. There's no nice on the football field." She said, "You need to think about being nicer." Well, I thought she was being silly. But I then had a class, and a young man came in late every day. I took him outside. I read him the riot act. You'll never be successful if you're not on time. And he said, "I'm so sorry, Miss Montgomery, but I never know where I'm going to sleep at night. I was at my uncle's last night, and I didn't know how to get on the bus." And he's looking at shoes, and I went, "Oh my God, the kid's homeless."
Mm.
Mhm.
14-year-old homeless child. And that's when the light bulb went off that I went, I'm a jerk.
Yep.
I care about so many things that are not important. Like, am I pretty enough to be on TV anymore? Will they ever hire me back? And I changed then at that moment. And I started to see that my kids were, you know, I'm worried about them doing their homework. Maybe they didn't eat.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, no one came home last night and they were afraid. Maybe they're in foster care and they don't know what to do. And I started to look at them as individuals and think, okay, yes, I'm not going to tell you I didn't have high standards for my students, but I started to try to understand what they were going through. And this roundabout way back to my novels, most of my novels deal with societal issues: children in foster care, children in religious cults, domestic violence. I also do things on environmentalism, like we have a wild horse problem in Phoenix, where I
Mhm.
live part of the time, and so there's one called Wild Horses on the Salt about our wild horse problem. So there's a lot of societal issues, and I think if I had never become a teacher, I wouldn't have written these books. Um, and I have to thank my students for that, because they made me see the world in a different way. And I want to point out that while we can plan our lives, I was going to be a sportscaster till I retired.
Mm.
Life doesn't go in the line you expect it to go on. There's
Sure.
all kinds of twists and turns. And I wish I had understood that when I went through those couple of years feeling sorry for myself, where I didn't want to run into anyone I knew because I was afraid they'd say, "So what are you doing now?" And they changed, that all changed me. And I'm a little nicer now, I think. I hope I'm nicer. But yeah, it was quite a learning experience. And I became an author, quite honestly, because as a teacher, I had 10 weeks off in the summer.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And
Yep.
I would find stories that were interested me. Very often they dealt with, as I said, societal issues. And then I would do all the research during the year, and then I would write a book over the summer.
Yeah. Wow. That's just that whole, thank you for sharing that journey and the creation behind the writing and that moment where your life, you say you kind of changed to be nicer. And I'll speak for Ben. You've been very nice to us. So that's our experience. I do want to keep going here, Annie, and I know kind of the theme for today. We want to talk about kind of embracing kind of lifelong learning and taking on new challenges, right? Kind of the broader kind of spectrum here for us is really transitioning into retirement, right? I know Ben talked about it in the beginning. For us, a lot of our listeners and clients we work with, and just maybe retirees in general, they struggle with finding purpose after leaving their careers, right? It's the one thing or a couple things they've done their whole adult lives, it feels like. And in your view, Annie, why is it important for retirees to embrace that attitude of lifelong learning and taking on new challenges once they transition out of the workforce?
Because it's very difficult. I mean, I retired 4.5 years ago from teaching.
Mhm.
Now I'm an
Mhm.
author. I was an author before, but that's not like getting up every day at the same time and having to be somewhere and having to get dressed and go out. So while I'm an author, I don't consider it my full-time job. So I consider
Mhm.
myself retired. It is very difficult when you have been running your whole life, and many of us have. I mean, whether I was in television or whether I was a teacher, I ran all day long because I also worked out all the time. I'm a gym rat, and I was barely home,
Mm.
and that was normal existence. That was my normal life. And so when you retire, I mean, the greatest thing to me when you retire is to throw out the alarm clock. I hate mornings. I've never been a morning person.
All
That
right.
5:30 a.m. that went off every morning when I was a teacher, I would get to school. My kids would be miserable first hour. I said, I'm as miserable as you are.
Mhm.
hate, I hate getting up. However, other than that, it's hard because all the routines you have go away. And I think human beings thrive on routines to a certain extent. And I seriously struggled. Sometimes I still struggle with it. And what I think is really important is for people who are nearing retirement not to wait. Don't wait and say, I think I'll take up painting. I always wanted to try to paint. Do it first to
Yeah.
see if that's something that really you'll stick with. Like I know I'll keep writing. I like to write, and I was lucky I was writing before I retired. But
Mhm.
to put it off until I retired, I probably never would have done it because it's complicated and hard and confusing, and there's so many things attached to it. I think you need to find out what you're interested in before retirement.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And and I feel sorry for people. I have a great deal of curiosity about things, probably why I became a reporter. I mean, I ended up also going into print reporting, and I wrote about a lot of different subjects, and I really enjoyed that. And I think I was curious from birth. I'm
Yeah.
lucky. I got some kind of curiosity gift. But
Mm.
if you're looking at retirement and you've been an accountant for 40 years, before you retire, you need to go, okay, what do I want to do? And what can I conceivably do?
Yeah.
It's really nice if you go, oh, I'm gonna travel. But quite honestly, I've traveled extensively and it's exhausting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is.
Even now, I'm like, I live in the Virgin Islands now and Phoenix. So I'm in the Virgin Islands right now. And to get home, it's like a 24-hour day.
Yeah.
And when you're 20, that's great. You have fun. But when you're 70, it's exhausting. So when people
Mhm.
say I'm gonna go to Australia when I'm 70, that's a long trip and it's tiring. So maybe don't wait that long if you can. But also find things that give you a little bit of a schedule. Like, for example, I still read the regular old newspaper every day, not online. I
Mhm.
read a paper newspaper, and that's an important part of my day to me. And I hold on to that. And I don't know what people think they want to do, but I think they have to start planning it like we plan financially
Mhm.
Mhm.
so that you can do what you want. You need to start thinking 10 years before you retire. What might I want to do and what will I be capable of doing? I'd love to still be officiating football, but I'm
Yeah.
not physically capable anymore. I've broken so many bones and had so many surgeries. You remember when they told us sports were good for us?
Mhm.
They lied. I have the MRIs to prove it. So I'm just saying there's some things I've had to give up some things that I would have loved to have done in retirement. I thought I would officiate when I retired, but I can't.
Yeah.
So you have to go, what can I do? What do I have the finances to do? What do I have the physical abilities to do? And
Mhm.
and how can I give myself a life that is equally as fulfilling as my job? Hopefully, people had a job they loved. That will make my days, I don't know, not boring. Boring is hard. Boredom is
Yeah.
Yep.
terrible.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a good lead in. My next question is, I think there's a lot of the concern about getting into retirement. There's uncertainty, right? Is to your point about what you just said about scheduling, right? Is having a schedule kind of keeps you on track and keeps things moving. And I
Right.
think when you say I don't have a schedule anymore, and that there's so much uncertainty, I think there's this. I think the point of uncertainty is that it can be overwhelming, right? Is I don't know what to try because I can try too many things, right? And I think there's a concern there about, well, I could do this, I could do this, but if I commit to one thing, then it means I can't commit to these other 4,000 things I could
Right.
possibly try. How would you advise someone to get that confidence to pursue new passions or skills? Because I think that is a common thing when Curtis and I are sitting down with people. It's just they're expressing like, I don't know where to get started, and I feel like if I do start somewhere, that it takes away other opportunities.
I think again, they need to start looking at these options prior to retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means you join a club,
Mm.
obviously you're working, you got family obligations, but if you start small, for example, I'm a rock collector. I've been a mineral collector my entire life, right? Only one of my kids is a rock collector too. And together we joined the Mineralogical Society of Arizona. What does that mean? There's a monthly meeting to talk about rocks. Don't laugh. And
Wow.
then in the winter months, the cool months in Arizona, we go on collecting trips. Do we have to go? No, but we can sign up once or twice a month and go with a group rock collecting. And while we're there, there's other people that have a similar passion that we do. And we go in the wilderness areas. I love the wilderness areas, and we find rocks, and it's a beautiful thing. So that's a passion that I have. I meet other people, I learn from them. And then do I want to get more involved in that? Maybe I do. Maybe I want to join other clubs, maybe because they're new in Arizona. We have 100,000 abandoned mines. Nobody would have stopped there
Well,
before air conditioning if it weren't for gold, silver, and copper. So we have a lot of mines. So for me, I could get much more involved in that world if I wanted to.
Hmm.
So start slow. Again, maybe you want to try painting. You've never done that, or art. Take a class. Take a community college class once a week. Fit it into your schedule somehow. I know sometimes people in the business world are like, I don't have time to take time for myself. I've got to do all these
Yeah.
things. But then you're not going to be prepared for retirement.
right.
Find out if painting is the thing you want. Okay.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's not. Maybe after you take that class at community college, you go, not for me. I think I'll try something else. And also, I think in retirement, we tend to lose our social contacts. I mean,
Mm.
you don't realize how much your work is your social life,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and your friends from work are your social life. I had a lot of friends who are teachers. I rarely see any of them anymore. Well, that's not their fault. They have families and grandkids and
Sure.
whatever. So you're going to lose a social life. So you need to get another one. You need to find another one. And for me, if it means I meet people rock collecting, great. My son likes to climb mountains, so he climbs with other people, and that's part of his social life. I'm just saying that you have to do this before you retire.
Yeah.
Because I think when you wake up, the first week's kind of fun. And then as time goes on, you feel kind of lost. And it's like I told you, I worked out all the time. Right when I retired, I got COVID and broke my leg.
Mm.
And it was broken in several places. It took me 8 months to walk again. And I couldn't work out. So not only had I just retired, but I broke my leg. And so I couldn't do that daily thing of going to the health club, and because I had
Sure.
social life at the health club.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult when you're home alone. And I think a lot of retirees find themselves in that position. Also, how many times can you play golf? Here's the other thing: you need variety. The guys who go, I'm going
Honestly.
to play golf every day. No, you're not. You're not going to play golf every day.
Yeah.
So you need some variety. And some of that can be with other people, and maybe some of that is by yourself. Like I played the guitar as a young person, didn't pick it up for 35 years, and then picked it up again. And so I can sit around. Normally, I broke my arm recently, so I can't do it now.
Oh my
But
goodness.
normally I can sit around and play my guitar. And that's
Mm.
part of my day.
Yeah.
And I can do that and feel fulfilled without anybody around me. So
Yeah.
I think you need a combination of things, because at some point, like I said, 2 months ago, I tripped in a pothole while walking in the morning. It's not even a good story. I don't mind broken stories if there's a good story, but that's not a good story. So I broke it in 3 places and dislocated it. And
Oh.
so I can't use it at all. My hand doesn't work at all yet. They just
Mm.
took the pins out 2 weeks ago. So the point is, I now can't play my guitar.
Mm.
So there's a little part of my day that went away. but I can read my paper. And I can go walk in the pool. I can't swim in the pool at the moment, but some things will go. So you have to have a variety, I think, of things that you like to do. And I think that's maybe how we replace work a little bit. We find those few things where we can be with others and few things we can do by ourselves. And maybe the person who paints is perfectly happy to paint alone at home.
Yep.
But to wait till you retire to find out what these things are, I think is a mistake.
Gotcha. Yeah. Annie, this is great too. I mean, you're taking us right into these questions we want to keep asking. So at this point, in this hypothetical, right? We've tried things, we're getting ready to retire, we've retired, and we're ready to kind of reinvent ourselves, right? And that's something that you've done multiple times, even throughout your career, as we've talked about your diverse background there. And I think a challenge for those who may be reluctant to not only try something new, but maybe to really embrace that new thing they found, it has to deal with kind of leaving their past behind. So what advice would you give to somebody on how to kind of have that fresh start with that, whether it's the new social network or the new activity or the new hobby, but they don't necessarily want to feel like they're leaving everything in their past behind either? What is that balance like?
Clearly, you have a skill. You can do things part-time. When I retired from teaching high school, I briefly taught at Arizona State University. And I taught one class. I just want to teach one class. So I taught one class in sports reporting. It kept me, actually, that was right after I broke my leg. And it was the first thing that made me have to get up and put on makeup and do my hair and go out again. Because that's the other problem. You get to a point where, why should I get out of my pajamas? And I think I don't think we talk enough about what a big change this is for people. That especially if you're fortunate enough to be financially well off, that's great, but it's not enough. It just isn't enough.
Right.
Have to find a way to integrate yourself back into some society, not the same level you used to. I don't need to be around as many people as I used to be around, but you have to find things that interest you. I like theater. I was in a play right before I retired from high school teaching, a community theater play. Hadn't been a play in 40 years. Didn't think I could do that anymore. I was horrified. I mean, I had to sing two solos and dance and stuff.
Oh my goodness.
And it was thrilling, and I would love to do it again, but I can't because I don't live anywhere. I live between two places, and I'm never in the same place long enough. So, I'd love to do that. So I encourage people to reach back into maybe, last time I was in a play, I was in my 20s, so reach back. What did you used to like to do? Maybe you could rekindle that. Also, geez, volunteer, be a volunteer. At this point, I've had pets my whole life. I've had a dozen dogs and 40 cats and over the years, and I love them dearly. But now I look and I go, okay, I'm going to be 70. And how old will I be if I have a kitten now? That cat I'll be 90 when that cat could still be alive. So I have to think about that. And how can I travel? Luckily, our one son stays at our home in Phoenix, where the animals are. And so we can come and go. So if you logically can't say, I love animals, but I can't beat them, go volunteer at the Humane Society.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a social life, and they need your help. There are a lot of places that need volunteers. And I think the baby boomer generation, we used to be the biggest group of volunteers, I think. Yeah, we were. And I think we're slipping. I think we're falling down. And I don't know that young people volunteer that much anymore. I think that's a perfect way to get at. I can't have, my dog, when she dies, she's the last dog. And then I can't have another one, but I could certainly go and help at the animal shelter or the Humane Society. So I think there's volunteer opportunities. Former teachers they can do things everywhere. Use your skills that you have. Maybe if you're an accountant or a tax person, you can go help people do those kinds of things. So I think volunteering is a good way to make yourself get up and out. And I think that's the hardest thing, especially in that first year of retirement. Make yourself do things. Make yourself go, even because you get to a point sometimes where you don't want to do things. You go, I just don't feel like doing anything because you haven't been doing anything.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in you to get up and go to work every day and to work out and do whatever you're doing. It's normal. When you stop doing things, it's easy to get on that. I think I'll just sit here and watch TV. And you can't live like that. So I think volunteering's great. And I think if you can look at what you can offer your community or what you're interested in, I like to garden. Okay. There are community gardens in many cities. And if you have skills as a gardener, go help other people do that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
So Annie, so I think I think you perfectly answered. I think probably the question I was going to ask you about, obviously, because I think we hear this protest of people that said like, I've done it all, right? And I've done this. And to your point about having to push, because and we had a gentleman on, Terry Tucker, who he had cancer and had lost his leg, and he talked about having pain, and one of the things that really got him through was hope, right? Is that even though you have a temporary setback, is hey, finding new ventures and new applications of your skills, and to what I said about volunteering and helping people, is that it's going to give you hope yourself as you're helping others, and that you serve a purpose. So I think that's a really important theme that you just touched on. But I want to ask about kind of this whole kind of identifying new interests, because I know what you just said about, hey, I was in theater, or I did sports. And I think there's people that maybe and we tell this story a couple of times. Of We had a gentleman that we has a client, and he was saying how he joined the Air Force in the 50s because he wanted to fly planes. He never got to fly a plane, though. He got to be a police officer guarding the airstrip, but he never got to fly. So it was one of the things we'd asked him in a meeting was, well, what's one thing you always want to do, never got to do? And that was one of the things that came out, and he never told his spouse.
yeah, go ahead.
So I want to ask the question, because I think there's some times where you kind of go, well, these are things I used to do, or I used to play guitar, now I picked it back up. Is that there's a lot of struggle sometimes to identify new interests, especially after you have years of routine. It's like, well, I've always, I got up at 5:30. I got to the school at 7. I did these things after school. I then officiated the game, and I had these routines and years and decades. How would you suggest someone that maybe isn't sure what to pursue, and they don't really even, maybe they struggle even with interests? Like how can they identify new ones but also stay active and engaged in retirement? Because I think that's a really important theme, that we want to find this purpose, want to find this interest. And even if I don't have one to identify off the gate, how would I go about exploring it? And I know you said like adult ed and communicate college classes and things. Are there ways that people can kind of find things? I think I froze.
Oh, I had you the whole time. You might have lost her.
So Annie, we talked a lot about, obviously, the broadcasting piece, the teaching piece, the writing thing, right? And I know, obviously, we want to talk about balancing comfort and growth here in our interests. And especially learning new things can sometimes feel uncomfortable, right? And especially later in life, that trying new things and getting out of that comfort zone is a really tough thing. Obviously, you had been a writer from, as you explained, the broadcasting side, right? And you kind of talked about, and then you're writing about things that you're seeing thematically. And I know, obviously, one of the books that you had written here was the Your Forgotten Sons, right? A little historical fiction, right? So
Right.
here you are, teaching, broadcasting, sports, getting into historical fiction. I believe around World War II, and around kind of a theme there. And maybe not your bailiwick like originally, right? Maybe it is.
Well, it is in a way, but I have 6 traditionally published books, and 5 of them are based in Arizona, which is
Mhm.
the wilderness. The Arizona is a beautiful state, and so my stories are based there. But this one is different, and this one, Your Forgotten Sons, came out this past June 6th, the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Mhm.
Came to me in an entirely different way. I had my best friend called me from Georgia and said, I need you to be my healthcare power of attorney, because she had a tumor wrapped around her spinal cord. And her husband was a soldier, and he has terrible post-traumatic stress. And there was a terrible thing that happened in a hospital in Afghanistan, or one of the places he was. He can't be in hospitals. So I went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. I met them there. And my job was to be her healthcare power of attorney. And there was a good chance she was going to wake up paralyzed from the waist down. And so it was very difficult. And
Yeah.
we were all horrified by the whole thing. And the night before the surgery, she hands me a Ziploc bag full of 75-year-old letters. And she said, whatever happens to me, I want you to promise that you'll tell Bud's story. Bud was her uncle. And even though she's my age, he was directly her uncle because her grandmother had babies like 20 years apart, and her mother had babies 20 years apart. So Bud was her uncle who never came home from World War II. And because I wanted to make her feel better, I said, yes, of course, I'll write a book about Bud. And she had her surgery. She walked out of the hospital, but I had made this promise. And what I learned about Bud was that he was in the Graves Registration Service. And that's something nobody talks about in war. You know, we see World War II movies, we read novels, we see planes fall from the sky and men shooting each other, but no one ever says what happens next. Somebody has to pick up the bodies and the body parts. So Bud's job was to locate, identify, and bury the dead. Now think about that. He hit the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, 10,000 dead between the Allies and the Germans. They all had to be collected. They didn't identify the Germans. They buried them in mass graves generally. But the Americans and the Allies had to be identified. And maybe they only had a foot. I mean, think about that. So this was his job. And this is something, have you ever seen a movie or read a book about this?
No,
but everybody who goes to Normandy goes to the beautiful cemetery, right?
Sure.
They built the cemetery. The United States has American dead in 36 countries and a couple of territories around the world today. These graveyards were built by the Graves Registration Service. And it was, to me, the most difficult and most harrowing job in the military. You know, in World War II, and today they ship bodies home in a day or 2 days. You know, they come right home. But in World War II, they just didn't have the capacity to do that.
Sure. So
they're buried, and people go to Normandy, and these magnificently graceful cemeteries were built by these men. So Bud was one of them. It was very difficult because all I had were his letters and family stories. And because in 1973, the Army's record depository burned down in St. Louis, destroying 80% of all the military personnel records of people discharged between 1912 and 1960. So his records were destroyed, which made figuring out where he was and what he was doing difficult, because of course soldiers never wrote home and said what they were really doing because of censors. And to write home and say, gee, Mom, I collected 10 bodies today and many of them were decapitated. I mean, you just didn't do that. You said, I miss your apple pie, right? So I was very fortunate that two things happened. One, I started paying attention to the postmarks on the letters. And the postmarks had dates and locations. And I followed him from the beaches of Normandy to the Battle of the Bulge, he was with Patton in Czechoslovakia. He was in Nuremberg. I followed him all over that way. And then I found one book called Crosses in the Wind, which was written by a captain who went on to become a lieutenant colonel, who was in the Graves Registration Service in World War II. The book came out in 1947, Crosses in the Wind, and it showed me exactly what those men went through. Exactly. And I'll give you one quick example. On D-Day, do you know what a Higgins boat is? They're the boats where, think Saving Private Ryan. All the guys open and the back falls and all the guys run out. Okay, that's a Higgins boat. And a Higgins boat took a direct shell and it flipped. And a couple guys got out, but most of them were dead. A few weeks later, after D-Day, they sent the Graves Registration guys out in a boat and said, would you go down there and pick up any bodies you found? They'd been in the water for 2 weeks. There's no scuba gear. There's no snorkels. They strip down to their skivvies. They hand them pitchforks and nets and say, go down and bring up what you find. This is what they did. And no one ever talks about it. So I wrote a book about Bud, using the letters, using the stories from that. It's inspired by a true story. Is it out of my bailiwick? Not completely, because I was very fortunate. I'm a history buff. And I went to my junior year, a part of my junior year in Luxembourg, and we studied mostly World War II. And, you know, where you could, you know, I could drive a little ways. I was in the middle of where the Battle of the Bulge was.
Sure.
So I had that knowledge. And the thing is, when I started writing this book, COVID hit. And I had intended to go to France and follow in Bud's footsteps. And I couldn't do that. And so I did, as a reporter, I need to see and smell and hear a story. And I was really frustrated by it till I remembered I spent 6 months in Luxembourg. I had those stories in my head. So I put them in Luxembourg, I had no idea. I had no evidence that he'd been there until the book had already gone to publication. And my friend Regina sent me an obit that ran in his hometown newspaper, and it said he'd been in Luxembourg. So I went,
Mm.
wow, I made that up. But
Ugh.
yeah. So yeah, I did have some, I have a pretty good understanding of World War II. So
Yep.
somehow that all worked out.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, I'm going to pause our next line of question for just a second and tell everybody to go into our show notes because we're going to have links to all of your books, but specifically that one because that entire story from your perspective of writing the book fascinated me. So I'm sure people will enjoy the book itself. So I do want to get kind of back to our line of questions here for you, Annie, and naturally, when we do anything in life, whether we're young or in our careers or retiring and trying to reinvent ourselves, dealing with setbacks and frustrations are certainly a part of life, right? And not every new challenge or new learning experience that we embark on goes smoothly. And certainly setbacks can be discouraging. So I want to ask you, how have you dealt with frustrations or failures or setbacks in your own journeys? And how can retirees, what advice do you have for people to keep moving forward despite coming into these obstacles?
I mentioned earlier that we can make all the plans we want, but
Yep.
life never goes it goes the way you plan. Now,
Mhm.
I ended up being a sportscaster. I made a plan, but then that ended. It ended without me even, I'm like an athlete who doesn't understand that at 26 their career is probably going to be over. And what do I do now?
Mm.
Um, I would like to tell you, I made that transition smoothly. I didn't because change is really hard, especially unexpected change. And I think I don't know. Maybe you have to have people around you that are gently push. I had people telling me for several years, you need to go be a teacher. You need to go be a teacher. And I ignored them. Like, I don't want to be a teacher.
Mm.
So I think if you're fortunate enough to have people around you that care about you, listen to what they're saying. That can be helpful. But I don't think change is ever going to be easy.
Mhm.
It's especially hard if you're not prepared for it. But when it comes out of nowhere, I think it's life's biggest challenge.
Mhm.
Whether it's a job related thing or a health thing, we have to learn to adjust because life is never going to be in a straight line. I don't think it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And what I learned was an amazing thing. Um, I when I got out of broadcasting, I explained I was devastated, brokenhearted, whatever. Became a teacher. Really didn't want to be a teacher, but it's a little ironic that I was unable to have any children of my own, and that used to really bother me because I wanted to have a family, but I couldn't. So
Mhm.
I'd given up on that, and then at the end of the school year, even though they told us not to do this, I always put my phone number on the board because my kids lived in a ghetto. I mean, they lived in poverty, abject poverty, and they did, and in 10 weeks of summer, they might not eat.
Mm.
So I always put my number, said, look, if you get stuck, you're in a problem, call me. I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
And one summer, this 14-year-old kid called me and he said, he just wanted to chat. I'm like, Brandon, is there something wrong? Can I help you? He goes, no, 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 I'm all right. I said, well, I put you in the newspaper class next year. Can't wait to see you at school. School came and he wasn't there.
Mm.
2 weeks went by. I called the number. It was disconnected. And I was really upset because I sensed that there was something wrong, but he didn't tell me what it was. And so short time after that, I get a phone call. It's him. And he says, Miss Montgomery, I'm hungry. I said, what do you mean you're hungry? And he said, well, they put me in foster care and they lock up all the food in the morning. And the new school I'm at, they don't have my paperwork and they won't give me lunch. And I said, okay, I'll get back to you. And I'm lucky I had no kids in the classroom because I'm swearing like a sailor.
Mm.
And the teacher who told me to be nice, she came in, she goes, what's the problem? And I told her the story. And she goes, well, if it bothers you so much, you call foster care and say he can come and live with you. And I said, don't be ridiculous. I said, I'm 55 years old. I've never had any kids. I'm not a mom. And she said, then quit complaining. And I
Mm.
went and got foster care. And 2 weeks later, that child was on my doorstep. I have had 4 kids now. Some of them still call me mom. I'm
Mhm.
Yeah.
now a grandmother. I have a 7-year-old grandson. And
Excellent.
I, I don't know. I'm a mom. I
Yeah.
sometimes I'm amazed. Now, if I hadn't lost my job in TV, finally become a teacher, I wouldn't be a mom.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So things happen and you go, oh, this is terrible. Life has changed so much, but maybe there's something better at the other end.
Hmm.
So I can't tell. Every time my oldest son goes, love you, mom, I'm like, oh, Mom.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
yeah, try to be open to the fact that life changes. It's supposed to change, and maybe things will get better.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that. And I know a lot of the things you're saying just resonate with me, and just and Curtis, I'm sure the same. Of from 100 and something episodes we've done, and there's a lot of, I think, awesome lessons that you're sharing here today with us. I want to ask a question though about, and this came up with, I think, one of our earlier episodes way back, I think in the 30s, with Dr. Sarah Zeff Geber. So she's an expert in solo aging. So people that don't have kids, and they're just aging themselves. And one of the things that she brought up was reinventing your network as you age, right? Is, I think, a lot of us, we go to work, we, as you said, you have the work friends, then you retire, that social network ceases. And if you don't reinvent that social network, your world gets pretty small, right? Is it all of a sudden,
Yes.
it might be my spouse, maybe I don't have a spouse. Maybe I just have a friend or two, and that's it. And if you lose a friend, for they move away or something happens to them, then you don't have anybody, right? And so she kind of highlighted this need of reinventing your social network is really important as you age. So, Annie, I want to ask a question. Obviously, we talked about lifelong learning as a theme, and exploring interests. How has that for you, like exploring these interests, and whether it be authorship or whether it be kind of, again, going between the Virgin Islands and Arizona, how have you kind of kept reinventing this network, again, as you've gone through each stage here?
I think I've had a lot of practice at this simply because I've lived in 8 states
Hmm.
and now a
Mhm.
territory. That would be 9. Because of broadcasting, I moved a lot. So
Mhm.
I made great friends, but then every 2 years I went somewhere else. And I had to constantly be reinventing myself. So maybe I'm a ringer on this question. I don't know. But
While we're asking.
constantly, I was the new kid a lot. Then when I went into teaching, I'm like, I'd never been in a room with all women, mostly women before. I'd always been in rooms with all men. So being with a
Hmm.
bunch of teachers is very strange.
Mhm.
But I think it's a skill. You have to learn a skill. You have to learn. I walk into a room and introduce myself to people.
Yeah.
I mean, as a reporter, that was just part of my gig. But I think probably shy people or people that are not used to putting themselves out there will struggle in this regard. And that's where I think you go back to increasing your social network by volunteering or by taking a class where no one really expects you to take over a room,
Hmm.
but you're with people that are like-minded, people that have maybe the person next to you is trying to learn to paint. You're all in the same group trying to learn to paint. So you have a common interest, and give it a try. No one and For people that are not accustomed to putting themselves out in public, I think you have to, that's a skill.
Yeah.
I taught public speaking to kids in high school, which still today, public speaking is the number one fear of most people in America. 25% of Americans fear public speaking more than, I think it's drowning, claustrophobia, and bugs and snakes. I mean, it's
Wow.
ridiculous. And when I say public speaking, it means going into a room where you don't know people and just chatting. That's
Yeah.
public speaking. And so I think people need to avail themselves of opportunities where they have to go and talk. And today, where we live on our phones,
Yeah.
Yes.
where that I think we are losing those skills. I mean, I want to look
Yeah.
people in the eye, chat with them. Um, and I think we're losing those skills. And I think as we get older, I think we're going to be much more alone or feel much more alone because texting doesn't cut it as far as I'm concerned. My kids tell me it does, but I think we need to look people in the eye. And I think you have to go out of your way and say, let's go to lunch
Yep.
in 2 weeks. Make a plan. You don't have to see people all the time. It's not like when we were young and you went out with 10 people every night. We don't do that anymore. But make plans with people like on this date, on this day, I'll meet you for dinner. And
Mhm.
sometimes we don't want to do that. Sometimes we want to be in our pajamas and
Hmm.
say, screw it, we don't
Hmm.
want to go anywhere. But I think we have to make that effort. I was feeling kind of like I wasn't doing anything when I was in Phoenix back in last year. And I decided to take improv. I
Wow.
just
Yeah.
wanted to be funny. So yeah, I just called up an improv place and they said, here's what it is. I said, fine, we got 6 classes. Great. So I took 6 months of improv.
Oh,
And
very
for
cool.
what reason, I don't know, but I was with young people people and older people. And, it was so much fun. Now, I had no skills in that area. I'd never done that before, but I think we have to be brave. I think we have to say, well, I don't know if I can do that. Well, try. What's the big problem? If you'll
Mm,
try, give it a try. If you don't like it, try something else.
Hmm.
yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing to get yourself out there, because it's way too easy to sit around.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have an avalanche of loneliness. And I think that's part of the problem with retirement is people get lonely because I have a partner we don't sit in the same room all the time and do everything together. But after a while, we get sick of each other.
Yeah.
You need
And
Yeah.
outside people to chat with. Once a week, he goes to lunch with his three best friends when we're in Phoenix. That's
mhm.
that's the thing. The boys go out to lunch, and
Mhm.
he needs that. And I think people have to think that way. If you have a spouse, you don't have to spend every waking hour with them. Let them go do something on their own, and you do something on your own. But I don't know what you do with people that don't think they're interested in anything. I had students like that. Like I'd say, where do you want to be in
Right.
10 years? Let's get you
Yeah.
there. I don't want to do anything. Well, I don't know how you fix that. Do
Yeah.
you?
It's
No.
yeah. Well, I think that's something where if people don't have the energy and the initiation to kind of go after something, then they're not going to. And you can kind of lead them with all the carrots in the world, but if they don't want to snap at something, then it's just not going to go anywhere. And but I think the point of this whole show and why we created it was like, well, let's just show you what's possible. And if you want to aspire to it, then great. And if you don't, and go, hey, I just want to teach, I want to treat this as a binge from vocation to a binge on vacation. Well, that is your
Yeah.
right too.
Or food. Learn, maybe take a cooking class.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Maybe go out and learn to ride a horse. Something. I'm just saying
Hmm.
that we have to make those leaps, even though
Yeah.
we're uncomfortable. First time I got up on the improv stage, I'm like, holy crap, what the hell am I doing here? Right? Was I nervous? Yes. Did it
Hmm.
matter? No.
Right.
Everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah.
We're all learning at the same time. So, like you say, lifelong learning. I've been back to college about 5 times.
Wow.
I think find something that fascinates you, even if it's World War II, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, and while there are lots of Facebook pages for all kinds of things that we're interested in, Ryan, my partner, laughs at me because I look at rock Facebook pages. He calls it my rock porn. So you look at this aquamarine, it's $25,000. Right. So I'm just saying it doesn't take the place of going out rocking with people, you
Sure.
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I
No,
love
I
that you even
love.
called it rocking with people. That's
Yeah,
pretty
that's
funny
great.
too.
No,
That's
it is.
great.
I know people laugh at me. I say I'm a rocker, and rockers know what I'm talking. I mean, the ones in Arizona go, "Oh yeah, what's your favorite mineral?" They know that. But when I say it to my friends in New Jersey, where I grew up, they're like, "What are you talking
Yeah.
about?"
I
Yeah, I'm
love
a
it.
rock and roller.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, Annie, we've reached kind of the end of our show today, and I do have one final question for you. We're putting you on the spot here.
Okay.
So naturally, the name of our show, right? We're all about retirement success. So we love to ask every guest, and I know you said earlier you feel like you're retired, even though you're an author. You didn't describe that as being kind of a full-time career. I want to ask you, how are you going to find your retirement success? Like, what does that mean to you?
Success to me is having stories to tell.
Hmm.
I love it.
Whenever, I'm still gathering stories. And I think that when you're dying, you're on your deathbed. If you don't have stories, good stories, and if you just have regrets that, boy, I never went to Paris, or I
Mm,
never learned to cook a souffle, or that you're going to be bitter.
yeah.
But if you're dying with stories, maybe not so much.
Hmm.
So to me is looking back, and all the stories don't have to be good, you know,
Yeah.
but interesting stories. Was your life interesting? And
Mm,
and I've had a very interesting life in the business world, and my job is to continue making it interesting in retirement.
I love it.
Love that. Well, Annie, we can't thank you enough for coming on our show. Just obviously from the diverse background you have, and I said what I love about you is you're a storyteller, and that I'm sure we could have asked you about 40,000 more questions, and it wouldn't have been repetitive at all. So I want to thank you so much for coming on our show today. I know our listeners got a lot out of it. I know we did.
Mhm.
We appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Episode 104, Annie Montgomery.
Yep.
Wow. Talk about a trailblazer, right? Is she,
Yeah, it's a
uh,
lot there.
right? I mean, geez, talk about like ESPN Sports Center early days. I can't imagine what that was like. In addition to Phoenix Suns pregame show, and just kind of, and again, just even the officiating part, as she described, was pretty fascinating. So some pretty
Mm.
cool stories. In addition to just whole the having this attitude about lifelong learning and embracing new challenging challenges was pretty cool. So again, I know we got a lot of it. Hope you guys did. This is the 104th episode of Retirement Success in Maine podcast.
Yeah.
So you can go and to guidancepointllc.com/104 to find more about it. We're going to have links to AnnMontgomeryWriter.com, her website there. We'll have our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think
Mhm.
it's X officially, LinkedIn, and also the links to her book. So again, we
Yeah.
talked to a few of those: Your Forgotten Sons, Wild Horses on Assault. So all those will be linked there. Love for you to check those out. Support Annie, but we really appreciate you tuning in today, and we'll catch you next time.